Hey everyone, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. P.T. Barnum said, "Money is a terrible master, but an excellent servant." Well, in today's episode, we talk about money, and I know it's a taboo subject, financial voyeurism, why we avoid the money conversation, the benefits of being more open and transparent, and more. My guest is the creator, host, and executive producer of the podcast, Other People's Pockets. She's the founder of a financial investigation company and an award-winning former investigative reporter for the LA Times and the Advocate newspaper in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her work led to the resignation of the long-serving warden of the notorious Angola prison in Louisiana and helped bring about new laws that reverse decades of secrecy in police disciplinary files in California. Please welcome the woman who's asking the tough questions and pulling back the curtain on other people's personal finances, Maya Lau. Maya, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, I am super excited about our conversation today. So I thought a good starting point would be for you to tell us a bit about your backstory. And while you do, would love it if you would share with us some of the experiences that you had that shaped the person who you are
Mm.
today.
Well, I am a journalist. I started in journalism about 10 years ago, and I was a newspaper reporter for a while. I was at the New York Times first as a news assistant, and then I moved to Shreveport, Louisiana to really become a reporter, and was at the Shreveport Times. And I went to another paper that you mentioned, The Advocate in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, before that was just before the LA Times came knocking. And then I went to the LA Times. So I have, most of my career has been in writing and in investigating various things. And over time, I just kind of realized that a lot of my personal curiosity started to veer more in the direction of money. I started to also just be interested in finance and in business. And like, I thought I wanted to maybe cover white collar crime at some point. Like, I just was interested in the way that money plays into our society. And then on a personal level, felt like, I had a kid 3 years ago. I, started to kind of really just want to make more money and have more stability. And as a newspaper reporter, there's a real ceiling on how much you can make, generally speaking. And I started to interview a lot of people in my own life, and also reached out to people on LinkedIn, people who'd left journalism, who are doing kind of interesting things, and asked them, like, what are you doing now, and how much money do you make? And that just became an interesting conversation to have with people. And I started to think, I have always been interested in personal finance and have listened to a lot of personal finance podcasts, but I didn't feel like I ever heard one where they asked people and that you get to actually hear the number of what people make. They talk around money, they talk about money, about feelings about money, but I always kind of felt like, well, ask them how much they make. So I thought, maybe I should do that podcast. And so it's something that I started working on a few years ago in terms of conceptualizing it, pitching it, putting it together. And then finally it just came out last month, Other People's Pockets. And I ask people how much they make, how they got there, their net worth, specifics about how they spend money, but also just their philosophy on money, their upbringing, various things having to do with their worth in society and in their life. So it's not just a sort of flat, like, in and out, which there's a lot of different people doing different things out there, but it's not like here's this person and here's how much they make, period. It's kind of like, let's actually talk for 40 plus minutes about the context around your money, you know? So that is just kind of some of what I've done in a nutshell. And you asked, what are some of the moments that really have shaped me in my life? Gosh, I don't know. Um, ooh, um, I mean, there's probably so many things that like I don't realize how they've even had an impact on me. Hmm.
You were in the
Sorry,
Peace Corps.
here's yeah. This is a place where I'm really bad at like recalling random memories. But yeah, I was in the Peace Corps. I served in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Senegal in West Africa. And I guess I would say, yeah, that shaped me in many ways. A big way was that it was probably the first time in my life I had that I could just really do a lot of thinking. You know, up until that point, I was in college and then I had a job for 2 years after college, but, you know, everything very busy, very fast paced. And I did the Peace Corps when I was 25. And so it was really the first time that I really had long stretches of time to think. There would be people, you know, I had a homestay family that I lived with there. And hanging out with them and hanging out with other Senegalese people, there would be times when it'd be so hot there that people just honestly like take part of the afternoon to just kind of rest and sit under a mango tree in the shade and like stare into the distance. And I'm not saying like that's what all people are doing there all the time, but there was more like it was okay to just be like, I'm just going to sit here and think. And that allowed me to reevaluate what I wanted to do because I had thought that I wanted to go to law school. I had worked at a law firm. I had taken the LSAT. Like I had told everyone I was going to go to law school. And it was during that time that I realized I really don't think I want to do that. I think I want to try to be a writer. I want to try to be a journalist. And um, so I think that experience of even though you said you were going to do something, it's really okay and even exciting to just throw that in the trash and do something else. And I think I've reinvented myself in some way, like several times in my life. And I think that had a big impact on me because I think like the ability to reinvent yourself is the best skill that you can have. Better than like being so great at something, at one thing. It's like being able to change is actually what's really important.
I would agree with you. So I want to stay on two points here. One, the reinvention, which I think is an important topic or important thread to pull on. So what was it about that particular 2 year period? You're 25 years old. You had already thought about going to law school. You make a decision there. It sounds like, if I heard you
Mm-hmm.
correctly, you made a
Mm-hmm.
decision that you're going to pursue a very different path and get into writing and journalism. What was it about that experience that had you reevaluating life and looking at things differently and being able to project years into the future and see that law is not what I want to do?
Mm-hmm.
So, what was it specifically, if you can point to
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I think that anytime you're abroad, it's like it's a good time to reflect. It just brings you out of your context. So I think it was partly that. It was like, here I am, I'm living on in a different content in a very different scenario than most Americans ever experience, and certainly very different than what I had experienced. And I think it shakes you up in a good way that like people live all different kinds of lives all over the world. I don't have to follow, you know, step A, step B. And I think that I just felt more free and maybe a little bit more confident in like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that I can try new things and learn. And I mean, the thing is that I later, you know, had another realization, which, you know, writing had actually always been really hard for me. It wasn't like, oh, I just write and write and write hours a day. It's what I love to do. Writing was always hard for me in high school. There was this part of me that liked it when I was writing about something that I felt really passionate about, or it was like personal and I knew it I could say. But in my career as a writer, it was actually always really hard for me. And a lot of people do feel that, but there are also a lot of writers who, like, after all the research you do as a journalist, then writing is in some ways for them like the reward. Like they get to synthesize it into words. And that was like not the reward for me. That was like, oh, now I have to write an article. So I kind of had this evolution again of realizing, like, even though I have this whole career as a writer, like, I don't need to do it anymore. Like, I writing really stresses me out. And I did get really better at it. I did get better at it, and I did get faster. But it was kind of this weird thing where I think in some ways I chose it because it was challenging to me and I wanted to master it. And I think it's great to take on those fears. And then I think it's also okay to say, okay, I did it. Like, moving on. So,
I love that.
yeah.
So speaking of taking on fears and knowing that this was something that created a level of stress for you, yet you leaned into it, right? You knew that you were just going to keep doing it, and you proved to yourself that you could. What is one of the greatest fears that you've experienced that you have leaned into? So beyond writing, what is one of those great fears that you've had that you said, you know what, I'm taking this on, I'm leaning into it, I'm going to push through this?
I mean, I think that on some level, my fear is that I'm not intellectual enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not well read enough, which I'm not. I'm really like, I will admit to, I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh, but I actually am all these things. Like, so I think that I don't know if this is what you're asking, but I do think like there's a tendency that I had toward like seriousness in previous years. Like, I'm gonna do and write about something that's really serious and really, like a really intense, part of our society. And like, I covered criminal justice. And part of that wasn't really my choice. Like, I kind of fell into that. And part of it was like, this is such an important thing in our society. And there's so many problems with it. And it did cross over a little bit into my interest in the law. Um, so I think that, like, and I think I always idealize like people who were working on really complex questions and had advanced degrees. And I kind of idealize that. And I think now I'm kind of like, I don't know. I think I have more confidence, and I think, you don't have to be a certain way to be taken seriously. And even something like money, I think in the past I thought, oh, it's so basic. Like, it's just money. I mean, like, it's not really hard to think about, or like, it's not, it's something that everybody deals with. And now I think the other way, like, I think because it's something everyone deals with, that's what makes it so universal and profound and interesting, because everyone does have some sort of relationship with money. And it's not that complicated to, I mean, of course, you can get into super complex conversations about money and the economy, but it also is accessible. And I think I've kind of come around to like, it seems simple, but like, therein lies what could be interesting about it. So,
Well,
yeah.
that's a great point. I love the way that you said that. I want to ask you about a comment that you made, because I'm curious where this came from. So you said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but
Okay.
something basically along the lines of that you didn't feel that you were intellectual enough.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that
Come
belief
from?
come from? And here's what I'd like
Yeah,
to explore on that for just a moment. So
sure.
number one, if you can think about where that came from, but then also I'd like you to share with our listeners something that you believed about yourself early on in life that you
Mm-hmm.
later discovered was not true.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I don't know where it came from. I mean, I think, and this is going to sound weirdly, I don't know how this will sound, but like, the more you know, the more you don't know, right? So like, I think the more aware you are, the more aware of all the things that you're not, because you no, no, you're observant and like you know what it really does mean to be a real intellect or whatever, because you can recognize that in other people. So I think there's part of that. It's like, like I'm sure, if you're an amazing violinist, you see the other violinists and you're like, I know I'm not quite there. Um, so I think it's part of that. I think it's maybe just feeling like that's what was, and my parents are super like accepting, and like they've never like pushed me too hard. If anything, they were like, Maya, please go to bed, like stop doing your homework, you need to sleep. But like I think that there was just like an expectation of like you're going to go to college and you're going to achieve big things, and like you're going to be impressive, and like that's what you should be, and that and so you kind of feel like, I don't know, I think I've also been just such a perfectionist that I the idea of what I want to be has always been like so big, and you're just always disappointing yourself. And then you asked, what did I believe about myself that I no longer believe?
Mm-hmm.
Um, hmm. So I think related to that, I was thinking about this over the past few years. Like I was thinking, why am I such a perfectionist, or why uh like I was trying to think about like why am I so driven, basically because a lot of people would say to me, oh, your parents must have been really hard on you. And like they weren't. And I mean, I think if I had really fallen by the wayside, they would have been like, Maya, you gotta do your homework or something. But they it was always like I think I even recall my parents being, it's okay to get a B, like it's really okay. Um, and I think that what I realized is my parents gave me a lot of praise, like, and I think that it can be okay, and I see it with my daughter too. Like you just want to like, oh my God, you did this thing. You're only 3 and whatever. Like you're so happy. But I think that like um it I think it probably became something where like I didn't recognize myself if I wasn't excelling. Like I don't know who I am if I'm not like doing well. Like I don't know what that like that I think that was the belief, is like, well, I have to do well. Like even when I would struggle, people would say, oh, but I'm sure you'll land on your feet. And it's like, okay, so I have to land on my feet then. Like, I don't know. So I think now I feel a lot more at ease with like, it's okay to not excel, or like, it's okay to, like I'm still me. And I don't know. I think I feel a little bit more okay with experimenting and being like, I don't know if I'm good at this, or I might be good now, or might not work out later. But um, my identity is not like, I mean, of course, it's hard to shed these things entirely, but I think I have a little bit more distance in realizing like I'm okay if I'm not always like getting the gold star. Um, yeah,
Do you have siblings?
yeah. I have an older sister.
And did you compare yourself at all to your older sister, or did you have a tendency to compare yourself at all to others, which as human beings we do
Hmm.
that, but was that
Sure.
something that was important to you to be a certain way, look a certain way, show up a certain way?
Hmm. Um, I'm sure that especially when I was younger, yeah, I probably like imitated her. I think like any like little kid does. I don't know. We also kind of really, my sister and I went our separate ways, and then now are good friends. But like in our adolescence, like we didn't get along, and we were like really probably differentiating ourselves from each other. So I didn't feel like I was like, oh, I want to do everything she does. But I definitely did, and always do, and always have compared myself to other people. And especially people that are my exact same age. Like, how did they, I think, um, you live in kind of a bubble when you're younger. At least I did. I felt like, there's middle school and then high school, and then you get into the world of college and then the working world, and suddenly you're in your 20s and you're seeing other people who have already directed a film in their 20s or whatever. And you're like, when did you have the time? What? So yeah, sure. Like, I think I've always been, a high achiever. And I think part of that is like, you want to achieve for some internal reason, but you also want to achieve because you see other people doing it. And so then you're like, well, I want to do something too. So yeah.
Well, that's an interesting conversation, and it's something that I've explored myself over
Mm-hmm.
the years because I can look back and see that there were things that I wanted to achieve, that I was driven toward, but not for my own reasons, not because it was something within that I was just so passionate about or wanted to satisfy,
Mm-hmm.
but it was for other people. It was for either my parents or someone else, because I felt that, okay, if I get there, wherever
Mm-hmm.
there is, or achieve this, I'm going to look a certain way, right? It's going to either feed my ego and it's going to make me look better in the eyes of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a lot longer than I'd like to admit to finally realize that, to discover, why am I doing, what are the reasons that I'm doing the things that I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
And sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, please, if there was something there that resonated, take it and run.
Well, I just think that like one's career, I mean, I've certainly found this is like it's this continual process of like refining, okay, but what do I want to do? And like what is central to me? What is my drive versus the drive that I feel that's been foisted upon me? And so I feel like I'm always getting a little closer to that. Like you've asked kind of about my career and yeah, like in the Peace Corps I was kind of realizing, oh, think I don't want to go to law school. Think like something about like journalism, asking questions, maybe writing feels more like, ooh, I'm interested. And then kind of realizing not so much the writing, but yes, the question asking is more at the core of what I want to do. And then now I feel even like closer to what's like my core. And then I'm sure that in a few years I'll be like, not so much this, maybe more of this. So I think that there's a big distinction that probably a lot of people go through in their 20s to 30s, maybe even 40s, of like, what's the difference between working hard and feeling like, okay, you know what? Everyone works hard. You got to put in the hours, like push, like that's the only way you grow. And realizing when it's like maybe you're working too hard or you're like you're pushing a boulder up a hill and like you might be able to do it, but like that's not working smart for you anymore. And like realizing that like the feeling of, I think I've gotten accustomed to and have had to kind of move away from, like you get accustomed to, okay, it's 9 p.m., but I still have more work to do and I'm going to push and I'm going to do it. And like, versus realizing now, like, no, like just because I can do that and probably in some way that's gotten to me where I am, I don't want to do that anymore. And I don't think that that's necessary or like that means that like I'm really achieving. I think that that's like pushing me in a direction that I don't want to go. And I want to lean more into like, what are the things that give me flow? What are the things that seem easy to me? Because you get so used to like working hard. It's like, it's hard, it sucks. But like actually the things that are in your flow that come easily to you, those are the things you should lean into. But it doesn't seem like you should because you're like, oh, this is so easy. Why would I do this? This is so, must be easy for everyone. Well, it's not easy for everyone. It's easy for you,
Exactly.
but you don't
Exactly.
know that. Like, I was just talking to somebody who, I forget like what thread we were on, but, oh, I just said like, I'm really into like like self learning, self reflection. Like it's interesting to me. Like I think maybe in another life I would be like a psychologist, or like I like that, all that, like thinking about your own brain, or like learning how your own or somebody else's brain works. And she was like, how do you know that about yourself? And I was like, what do you mean, how do I know that? Like, I just know that. And she's like, but how do you know that? Like, well, I guess like I talk to myself all day. Like it's one long conversation with myself all day. I'm always like analyzing things that happened that day, or a conversation I just had, or like turning over ideas in my head. And I don't know, she just said something like, yeah, well, not everyone necessarily does that. And I was like, what? And I don't know. I don't know if like she necessarily, but she just pointed out that like the things that are so obvious to me are not necessarily obvious to anyone else. And so what's hard is to actually put a mirror up to yourself and think like, okay, so how do I identify like what makes me special? Because I would never recognize it because I don't think it's special because it's so obvious.
So that's such an interesting thing that you said. And it goes to a point that you made before, that we don't know what we don't know. And
Yeah.
often it takes someone else
Yeah.
to recognize our own gifts, our own greatness,
Mm-hmm.
because we're so close to the situation. We
Yeah.
live with ourselves every day.
Right.
And to your point, there's so many things that we take for granted
Yeah.
that we can do, but someone else looks at that and says, "My gosh, you're an absolute rock star, or you're a genius in this area." And you think to yourself, "What? What?
Right.
How
Yeah.
could that possibly be?" So I think that's super interesting. Have you done a 360 degree or a 360 assessment before? Are
No.
you familiar with that? Okay.
Other than I mean, I'm sure that's used like in the corporate world. Like we're gonna, I don't know. Like,
No,
if I
you're
haven't
absolutely
mapped it
right.
out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of times
Yeah.
that's where it's most prevalent, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Mm,
But what's good about it is it gives you some very good context in how other people perceive you, perceive your values, the way
mm.
you
Oh,
communicate,
so
what your
is it like
strengths
kind of
are.
when like a manager will like do it to find out how their employees, like getting a lot of feedback from different people in order for them to grow,
That,
or
yeah, that's
anybody can do it, I guess. Yeah.
definitely part of it. Managers will have a 360
Hmm.
evaluation as well, so they can learn what their
Right.
strengths are, where they're showing up. So
Right.
I mention that only because asking for feedback, you ask tough questions, right? As an investigative journalist and reporter, your objective, I've not been in your shoes before, but you're trying to get to the truth, right? You're trying to peel back the layers and just keep asking questions. It's almost like I think about the Socratic method, just, why did you do that, right? Keep going deeper and deeper to uncover the real story. So when we get feedback on ourselves, when we get feedback on who we are, how we show up to other people, how other people perceive us, the conversations we have, it can be incredibly meaningful. So I'll make a point when I'm with certain people that I'm associated with, I'll ask for feedback. So
Hmm.
tell me, how did I handle that situation? What would you have done differently? Is there an area that I could improve upon? Things like that, just so I can
Hmm.
better understand and reflect on myself, so I know the areas where, because look, we all have blind spots. So
Hmm.
when somebody can help us identify those, it can really help us improve in key areas, and also understand those gifts that we have that we do take for granted often.
Yeah. No, I've never done that. It sounds like a great idea. And I think I'd be a little obviously nervous to hear the truth. Like, oh God, no. Like I think I would need a little like prep and a little like, yeah, I would need to be prepared. But also like I would really want, I guess like how do you ensure that people are telling the truth? Is it anonymous or like somewhat Okay.
Often it is. Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
yeah, like I would want it to be done in a way that like people are actually sharing what they really think and not just like, oh, let's all submit something that's kind of nice sounding or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I really think like the closest I've had to that, which is not not the same exactly, but just being married and having a spouse who's also extremely thoughtful and articulate and introspective himself, like that has been the biggest mirror to me. I'm like, oh wow, I did not know that I did that, but he also loves me and has a lot of compassion for me, and so it's delivered in a compassionate way. It's not like you just seem like a jerk, period. Like there's yeah, it's been really, I feel like the experience of being married is like such an interesting exercise in like learning about yourself.
Oh, that is so true. How did you and your husband meet?
We met through a mutual friend. I knew this woman, Rosie Schapp, she was the drinks writer at the New York Times Magazine where I worked. She's a writer. Um, she and I were friendly, and then she had always been telling me, not always, but like maybe once or twice, she mentioned, "Oh, there's this guy, Jesse. I just think you guys just would be friends. Like you guys just have like similar energy." And I always write down things in my phone. Like when people tell me, "Oh, you have to read this book," I'm like, "Okay, I'm just gonna write that down on my phone right now, in my notes app or whatever." And so I hadn't met him for a while. I didn't end up meeting him for a while. He was in New York. I was in New York. We didn't know each other. We both moved to Louisiana around the same time, completely randomly. He moved to New Orleans. I was in Shreveport. And again, when you're in that scenario, you're like, I don't know as many people here. And again, she was like, you should meet up with my friend Jesse. And so I did. And we like totally hit it off as friends first, and then we started dating. But at some point I realized that I was going through my phone once we had already been dating a while, and his name was in there, and I was like, oh my gosh, your name has been in my phone for years as like
Wow.
somebody doing cool things that I should check out. And it also turned out we worked on the same block in New York City and went to the same cafe, and we're probably crisscrossing each other all the time. So I think like one way or another, we probably would have met, even if not for her.
It's like the
So
universe was trying to send you
yeah,
signs, right?
hello. Like, yeah.
That's funny. So if I were to have a conversation with Jesse
Oh
without you in
gosh.
the room, and I asked Jesse what his favorite personality trait is
Of
about
mine.
you, Maya, what do you think Jesse would say?
Um Gosh, I don't know. I think that he's told me this before, that I'm um how does he put it? Like I'm both kind of like I have some like zhuzh, and like I kind of can have like a sparky conversation with him, and be kind of like intense in a good way, but that I'm also like a kind person, like that I'm not like a flash in the pan, like, ooh, had so much fun for one weekend, but then they're not getting back to you and they're kind of flighty, but then when you see them, they're fun, but then you don't like that. I like am like a grounded person that like gets back to people and is like nice. And I think, yeah, maybe he's dated people that were like exciting, but then kind of uh really exhausting to like deal with in other ways. So
Yeah, very surface
uh,
level, not too deep, let's
yeah,
say.
yeah.
Very good. So I'm curious before we talk more about your podcast, because there's definitely some things I want to dive into there that I have found incredibly interesting. The conversation around money, was that a conversation that you had with your parents and your sister? Were these conversations at all that were happening around the dining room table?
I think yes and no. I definitely not. We weren't a family of, where it was like daily conversation and talking about other people, like, oh, this person spent this much on their home. Like, not really. I think that it was. I didn't really feel like it was taboo. But I didn't feel like there was an emphasis on it. I mean, if anything, I felt like the message I got was that focusing on money is, if you're somebody who really cares about money and just wants to make a lot of money, that's kind of like lame and like boring, and like those people aren't very interesting, and that like the people that are more interesting are trying to do something good for the world, and they're people who are, like I said, like well read and well traveled, and like maybe they don't make a ton of money, but they like really have something to offer. And they so I think there was that emphasis of like, don't try to make a ton of money, like try to use your talents wisely, make a positive impact on the world. Hopefully you will make okay money, but it's sort of an afterthought. It's sort of like, I mean, my mom even told me recently, like her view was like it was honorable to not have money. Like it was righteous to not have a lot of money. Now I see all that very differently, because I think it's also very privileged. Well, I think the economy has changed. I think we're from different generations. I think in their generation you could be like, like I'm not trying to make a lot of money, but ooh, I can still afford a house. Like it was just different back then. So now I think it's like a very privileged thing to kind of be like, oh, you should just make the world a better place and don't worry about money. Like, no, to have what they had now, you would have to make a lot more money than they did. So, but yeah, I think that was kind of the message. And that was also kind of an evolution for me of like getting really real about like, you know what? I think that in order, especially to live in a big city, yeah, you gotta make some serious money often. That's just, how it is, or you've got to be really creative. It's not just you like plod along and, one day, you know, look, you saved your little pennies and it adds up to a house in LA or something. Like it just, yeah, I think now you have to kind of think about money. I feel I'm not saying that everybody has to focus on money as much as I do, but
Well, I
yeah.
think to your point though, so hearing a comment like your mother made, if you hear that at the right time in life, during your formative years, and there's a belief that's attached to money, right? We either often there's a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset, and it's we attach so much meaning
Mhm.
to things. So if we grow up a certain way with a certain belief and a certain bias against whether those that have money or wealth, whatever it happens to be, we carry that with us, right? Subconsciously, it affects the way we make decisions.
Mhm.
It certainly does. But once we discover that awareness, then we can begin to work on that and reframe that depending on what we want to achieve, right? So I think the fact that you have decided to have these types of conversations first, I think it's incredibly interesting, and I love the approach that you take, the way that you frame the questions, it can be an uncomfortable conversation, but it just draws you in. So for all of you that are watching and listening right now, we are talking about Maya's new podcast, Other People's Pockets. And I want to congratulate you, because not only does it take a leap of faith and a lot of work and intentionality to create it and launch it, but then to constantly be disciplined to do the work every day, right? To be consistent about releasing episodes. And you're already ranked very well on Apple Podcasts, which is, for those that may or may not know, that is not an easy feat. That just doesn't happen. So you've put a lot of work into this. I know you have a team behind you, but nothing happens without strong leadership, a strong vision, and a strong voice. And you definitely have that. So
thank you.
Absolutely. The first thing I wanted to ask you, though, is how did you get involved with Pushkin Industries? So for those of you that don't know, Pushkin Industries, it's an audio content company. It was co-founded by Jacob Weisberg and Malcolm Gladwell. So obviously you're in great company there. What attracted you to that company?
Well, I need to back up because the story begins a little before that, where I pitched, really wasn't a pitch. It was a conversation I had with another podcast company called Little Everywhere that I still work with. And so I work Little Everywhere and Pushkin co-produce this show. And I, again, credit to my husband. He introduced me to Jane Marie, who's one of the co-founders of Little Everywhere. It's a podcast studio in LA. And I just had this conversation with her where I was like, look, I need to talk to a podcast brain. Like, I have this idea. I don't know how I'm going to make this show, but here's my idea and my, dream list of guests and what I want to ask them. And as we were talking, she was like, I can't remember if it was in this conversation or in a conversation subsequently. She was like, maybe we would want to make this podcast with you because we've been wanting to do a financial related show. We haven't found the right angle. And then, at some point they were making me an offer. And so then I started, we negotiated, I accepted, I started making the podcast with them. And the idea was, there's a lot of podcasts that get pitched around that are just concepts. They haven't not been made yet. And what we wanted to do was actually start making the show, have episodes so that it's not like, this is an idea. What do you think? It's like, you can listen to the 5 episodes or whatever. Like, this is how it sounds. This is a real thing. And so we did that. And then we were pitching it around to a bunch of networks because the idea is maybe the analogy is like, if you make a movie, like you could have a small production house that made the movie, but then you'd need like a Warner Brothers to distribute the movie. So that was what we were looking for in Pushkin or in a Apple pod or in an Apple or a like an iHeart or Spotify or like that kind of partner. So then we were pitching it around. And then we got connected through to Pushkin eventually, and they liked the idea, and they also wanted to work with Little Everywhere on this other podcast that they were doing, The Dream. And it just I don't know, it happened. And I realized this is like 1,000% not a normal story. Most podcasters don't just pitch a random idea they had and, it becomes a thing. I realized like I have been incredibly lucky and it's worked so far. And part of that is also why I, you mentioned like all this like hard work that goes into it. Like I have really been feeling like this is a joy. Like I never expected to be doing this. It doesn't feel like grinding hard work. I mean, I do like think about it a lot and I'm very thoughtful, but I'm not like, oh, gotta do like another episode. It's just like, who knew that I could be doing this? So that's kind of how that all happened. Which again, I realize is not like good advice. It's just, it's not necessarily something that happens every day, but I feel very lucky.
Well, I think it's luck obviously being prepared, being in the right place, having the right connections. There's a lot that goes into it. And if you're able to pull the lens back far enough, right, you could see where some of those connections happen. Had I not had this conversation, this may not have happened. Had I not met this person, etc. So we can talk about that. But here's the thing, and this is something I want to just mention for those that are listening right now who may not be aware of this, and numbers vary, but there are roughly somewhere in the range of 2.5 to 3+ million podcasts out in the universe. The interesting thing about that is, of those podcasts, on average, there is what is called pod fade. So many people decide to start a podcast because sounds like a great thing to do, fairly low barrier to entry, and it might be really cool, right? I've got a voice, I've got a story, there's something I want to say. Then once you start, you get to often episode 4 or 5, and that's where things tend to fade away, because you realize that there is a lot of work involved. And yes, there's so much value that comes from it. Yes, it can be a lot of fun, but don't ever think for a moment that there isn't a lot of intention and work behind it, and research and all the other things that you, Maya, do. And right? You're experiencing this yourself, but you've been able to create something that is magical. And as I mentioned to you, it really does pull you in. And I want to mention to you this, and I've listened to all the episodes that you've released so far.
Thanks.
And I'm going to encourage everybody to do exactly the same thing, because they're great conversations. But you kicked off the show with the podcast with a really amazing episode with Mistress Marley. And I'm curious, at this juncture, is there any conversation that would surprise you or stun you in what you hear?
Well, and just so people know, Mistress Marley is a financial dominatrix. So that's partly why the conversation for some is so like, ooh, risque, interesting. She has such a interesting line of work, berating people online and being a dominatrix, and then getting money sent to her, often with no sexual contact. So is there anything that would surprise me at this point? Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always surprised or like delighted with things I hear. I don't know. I really want to continue to both hear from people that are known, and that when you scroll, like one of the kind of the goals I have is like someone like Adam Davidson or Cord Jefferson, both are writers and, somewhat well known. You've heard them on a lot of other podcasts, but have you ever heard them talk about how much money they make? No. Like, that is what I'm trying to do, where it's like, ooh, like I know this person, I love their content, or I love hearing them talk, but I've never heard them talking about their personal finances, So there's that, but then it's also like other people that are not well known, or are just like, doing regular interesting jobs, because I think that that's interesting too, like that they're not famous, but they have a money story too. So I would love to talk to like a surrogate who maybe has been a surrogate multiple times, maybe has made some good money off of it, or at least like that has been one of their primary sources of income, something like that, where it's money, but it's also emotions, and you're helping another family, and how do you put a price on that? People doing kind of everyday jobs, a shoe shiner, a bus driver, etc. I think that I get a lot out of hearing what everyone's relationship is with money, just because everyone has one somewhere or another.
Absolutely. Why do you feel that this is such a difficult topic to discuss? And when you have the conversation on your podcast, there tends to be a hesitation when the question is asked or when you're
Mhm.
delving into this more deeply. But so two things. Number one, why is it a difficult conversation? And then number two, why is it important to open the conversation around money, and what is the benefit in having that conversation in your experience?
Mhm. Um, the reason why people are so uncomfortable, I think it really can vary from person to person, because there are some people that did grow up in families where you talk about money a lot, but I think they're more in the minority. But um, generally, it's that it's not wasn't talked about growing up. Often among people that are older, it was more explicitly like, you don't talk about this, it's rude, it divides people, similar to like, you wouldn't go be a guest at someone else's house and then like talk about religion or politics the whole time, because you don't know where they stand. And so there's that. It's the rudeness. It feels a little too raw, a little too real. It's like, getting naked. It's just like, what? Why are we doing this right now? It just feels awkward. And People have a lot of shame around money. I think, because money is literally hierarchical, numbers are on hierarchy. It's not like, oh, we're talking about dog breeds that we like, and like, I don't know, I like this dog breed and it doesn't matter, it's just whatever, it's preference. It's like, when you talk about money, you're literally putting yourself on a scale, and so then you're worried that you're going to seem a lot higher than someone else in the room on the scale, or lower. There's this idea of, if you don't make enough, or whatever you think is enough, it's your fault. You were too stupid to not figure out like how to go out and make more money, or whatever. Like, there's just so many messages around shame. And then because we don't talk about it, then it doesn't get aired out. In terms of, wait, what was the second part of your two-part question?
Yeah. So the second part of that is the benefits of
Oh,
actually having these kinds of conversations,
mhm.
why it's important to talk more about money.
I mean, on a very practical level, like, I will tell you, when I was at the LA Times, salaries were secret. It was impossible when I started. It was impossible to know for a fact if women and people of color were getting paid less, even though everyone suspected it was true. And it was only when we formed a union and there were rules about how a company has to open its books, and we actually got salary data. It wasn't like everyone could see it, but the union bosses, certain people could see it, and then analyzed the data and found patterns, and found like, yes, women and people of color are being underpaid. So basically, the secrecy serves the employer by and large. It makes it so that people don't know the truth. They can't prove, oh, you can't prove that we're underpaying, because you don't know. You don't have the evidence. And once that was made more open, that's when people got raises and got put in line with what they should be paid. It was only after that we had the union that I finally got a raise at the LA Times. Even after like years of lobbying and asking, and my media bosses being like, oh, you should totally get a raise, I'm going to fight for you. But it was just so hard at that institution for that to happen. So I think the openness is part of just airing the conversation, so that people can organize, so that people can know what's possible, um, so that hopefully there's more fairness. I realize also sometimes the openness can be a little too real and too raw. Sometimes it's a very flat kind of data point to know about someone. Like, if you just found out, I don't know, your best friend or your boss was making 10 times what you thought they were, it just feels like you might judge them, or you might reflect on yourself. It might not feel great to know that. But my hope is that, like sex, it's just something that we're talking about more as a society, that used to seem so uncomfortable, but we recognize that if you don't talk about it, that's when things are hidden in the shadows. That's when people don't get help. That's when people don't know what they're worth. So yeah, I think it's just important. I don't think or expect that every person in this world needs to put out their numbers if they don't want to. Obviously, my show is like a slice of like these are certain people that have chosen to come on my show that want to be part of this movement to like just talk about it. But yeah, I think that it's just like it's a refreshing kind of um thing to learn about other people and even even amongst friends to be open and to be like, okay, so let's strategize here, like what's the deal, what are you get how did you get that raise, like what, let's help each other out. So um yeah, all of that is part of what drives the show. There's this just straight up financial voyeurism part of like, ooh, I'm just curious, and then there's also like, I think that this is something we need to talk about more. So
I love the fact that you're opening the conversation, and I agree with what you said about the value and benefits of having the conversation. I think there's more good that comes out of having that conversation and understanding that more than keeping it hidden or taboo. And sometimes the difficult conversations that we have, they're the necessary conversations that we have. So for all of you, I'm going to encourage you again, go check out this new podcast, Other People's Pockets. It is an excellent podcast, great storytelling, great questions, and you dig deep. And Maya, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. There's two things I'm going to ask as we wrap up. I have all of your social handles, links to everything that you're doing. We'll put that in the show notes. Please give our listeners a challenge. What would you challenge them to do?
I would challenge them to ask somebody in their life that they're curious about how much money they make. And it can be in a very friendly way. It can be part of their own quest to know if they should be getting paid more. It doesn't have to be like, I'm just trying to violate you. It can be like, I want to know for me because I need to ask for a raise. And so I need to know what's out there. That's a challenge that I would have. Also one that I try to do that I am not good at doing is like to try to get rejected. Like to try to uh try to do things that you're pretty sure someone will say no, like not in a bad way, but uh like asking somebody at a store if you can get like a free cookie or whatever, like just, and the more you like try to do things, you might either find that you get more yeses than you think, or you just get more used to like it's not that big of a deal to get rejected. Like you have to try, like who cares. Again, it's not something that I'm good at trying, but I do, along with your listeners, I will also try to get rejected more often.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to hear the next time you get
Ooh,
rejected and what the question was that you asked. So, all of
yeah.
you heard Maya's challenge to you. Take her up on that challenge. Two of them. I think that's fantastic. So, Maya, here is my final question to you. What is
Okay.
one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person that you've become?
Um, mm, well, I think that for me, it was a really difficult decision to leave the LA Times and to leave what I thought of as my dream job, or at one point I thought of as my dream job. That was really hard. Now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. No big deal. But it actually was really hard. And I would fantasize about getting laid off so that I didn't have to decide. And I talked to a lot of people who had left journalism, both for practical things, but like just how did you identify yourself, or how did you deal with your identity leaving and stuff like that. So that was a really hard thing, but it was it's launched me into this whole thing I'm doing now, and it I'm glad that I did it, but it was really hard at the time.
I'll bet it was. Thank you for sharing that. And Maya, thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, getting to know you, you sharing your experiences and your knowledge with the rest of us. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm grateful for you.
Thank you so much. It was nice and also very I didn't realize how much of like a pseudo therapy session it would be, but it was great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a favor to ask. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That goes a long way and helps this podcast expand its reach. As a matter of fact, do exactly the same thing with Maya's podcast. Listen to it, subscribe, rate, and leave her a review as well. We would both appreciate that. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click the podcast button. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Check out other people's pockets, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.